if the flood was responsible for laying down all these creatures where they're found, why did it just put the fish in certain strata and beyond? Why aren't the fish in the other strata? Why are there segments where you have seashells, for example, which don't have any significant difference in size or weight or density, and yet they're arranged perfectly in these sequences? These are shells that develop gradually different types of ridges, different numbers of ridges, I should say. Or what about these, which are roughly the same size, but you can see the whorls change. And we're talking about long periods of time. Of course, if you don't believe there are long periods of time, at least we're talking about many, many, many layers of strata in the fossil record. And there are many cases like this. These are just two examples. Another question would be, why do you not find flowering plants until the late Cretaceous, about 100 million years ago? Why did all the flowering plant fossils end up in those strata? Why aren't they all over the place in the other strata? What's so special about flowering plants that they wouldn't show up in the fossil record until so late? Or perhaps my favorite topic, what about dinosaur poop or coprolite? What do you expect to find in dinosaur poop if dinosaurs, fossilized dinosaur poop, if dinosaurs lived at the same time as all other animals? Squirrels, ducks, you name it. What do you expect to find in the fossils of dinosaur poop? Squirrels and foxes and just about anything. But you don't. You only find animals alive at the same time, in the same strata as those dinosaurs. What do you find in the fossilized poop of vegetarian dinosaurs? You don't find evidence of flowering plants unless you're at the same place in the fossil record where you have flowering plants. All right, so there are problems with this, and I think the fossil record is one type of evidence that supports common descent. The other type of evidence, which is very powerful, how much time do I have left here? 2 minutes? So I'm not going to have time to go into detail unless I can do it later. The other type of evidence that correlates with this is molecular evidence. When I teach my course, I teach it with a molecular biologist. And so he's much better at doing this than I am. I'm not a molecular biologist. But what's interesting is that the DNA that codes for the amino acids, that subsequently codes for the various proteins, can be looked at because it's redundant. When there are, in other words, mutations that take place in the DNA that produce different amino acids, and yet they get hooked up so as to produce a protein that still works. One of the best examples of this kind of evidence is cytochrome C. Because if you look at cytochrome C, it's present in virtually all types of life. And so we can look at the changes that have taken place in those amino acid sequences and compare them. We can compare human beings, for example, to chimpanzees. We can compare human beings to other apes. We can compare the human being sequence to other types of life. And what do we find? We find a correlation. That is, the differences between those sequences, the differences between human beings and other types of life, is exactly what we'd expect given the fossil record. That is, we expect that we're pretty closely related to chimpanzees. We're not descendants from chimpanzees, but we have a common ancestor that's quite recent. What is the difference between our cytochrome C sequence and that of a chimp? 0. They're identical. As you go to different types of life, you find more and more differences. So the two types of evidence are radically different, and yet they cohere. The last thing I have to say, just as an opening remark, is that another dichotomy I don't agree with is the one that distinguishes evolution from design. I think there's nothing in what I've said that is not in any way contradictory to saying that God designed the universe and brought it into being through a gradual process. Thank you.
You need the microphone. You don't need it for the whole debate? Okay.
Okay, now we have 7-minute rebuttals to the opening statements. Dr. Hoffman will have 7 minutes to rebut Dr. Hofer's opening statements.
I'm fine. I'm ready. Yeah, okay. Rock, paper, scissors. That's fine. Are you ready? I'm ready. Okay. Say that again. What's going to white out mine? Yeah. And the other mic you said to put down, and I want me to wear it? Where did you put it at? Oh, down below. Okay. Okay. 7 minutes to rebut. I have over 4,000 pictures in my PowerPoint, so it would be easier if you would put your material in the same order that I have my answers. Saved me a lot of time. He mentioned the geologic column or fossils as evidence for evolution, and similar DNA, similar cytochrome C, etc. Molecular evidence is evidence for evolution. I would point out, Your Honor, that similar DNA and similar design indicates a common designer. The same guy designed them all. It certainly wouldn't stand as any evidence for evolution. It's just as much evidence for creation. And when it comes to fossils, this is one of the Achilles heels, one of the many Achilles heels of evolution. There's no such thing as a geologic column. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It's true the Earth has many layers of strata. There's no question. Okay, thousands and thousands of layers of strata, but there's ample evidence those strata layers formed quickly. This textbook tells the students, over millions of years, the Colorado River has carved out the Grand Canyon from solid rock. Well, that is just simply scientifically not possible. It is a fact that Grand Canyon exists. The evolutionists have a theory about it. The creationists have a theory about it. The evolutionist says it formed slowly by a little water and lots of time. The creationist says it formed quickly by lots of water and a little bit of time. Somebody is clearly wrong, okay? And we'll show you in a minute who it is. It's a fact. The Earth has many layers of sedimentary rock. There's no argument about that. Now, the evolutionist says these layers formed slowly over millions of years, and each one represents a different time scale. The creationist says, no, all these layers are from one big flood in the days of Noah. Asking the question of where can we see the flood in the geologic column is like handing somebody a globe and saying, please show me the Milky Way. The globe is a small part of the Milky Way, okay? The entire geologic column was formed by the flood. So it's a ridiculous question to ask, where is the flood in the geologic column? The whole column is evidence of the flood. That formed it all. I'll show you here. The evolutionists are always trying to erase the line between the theory and the fact column and try to make students think that their theory is part of the fact. And it's simply not, okay? And a good philosopher and a good scientist ought to recognize you need to keep your theories distinguished from the actual facts. It's a fact the column exists. I mean, it's a fact the Earth has layers, and it's a fact the canyon exists, but it's not a fact of how it formed, okay? This textbook says the Colorado River has cut through layer upon layer rock over millions of years. Well, I'm sorry, that is just simply physically and geologically impossible. If you built a dam across Grand Canyon, a huge lake would form behind it, covering several states. Between these two red lines, you can see the snow there. That is the snow line indicating high elevation of what is called the Kaibab uplift. It averages between about 7,000 or 8,000 feet above sea level. The river enters to the far right, and the river is at 2,800 feet above sea level when it enters the canyon. Very important thing to consider. The river flows downhill from there, and at the highest point of the Kaibab uplift, the river is at 1,800 foot elevation, giving it more than a 1 mile drop, a very impressive hole in the ground. Been there, flown over it, studied it intensively, okay? As the ground is rising up, the river is flowing down. All rivers flow downhill. I would like to point out a couple of things, Your Honor. The top of the canyon is higher than the bottom. The river runs through the bottom. The top is higher than where the river enters the canyon by 4,000 feet. Rivers don't flow uphill. There is no delta. Where is the mud that washed out? That river could not possibly have made that canyon. Grand Canyon is obviously a washed-out spillway from a lake that existed sometime in history. A massive lake was backed up, overflowed, and washed out that canyon probably in a couple of weeks. Certainly not millions of years, because water simply does not flow uphill, and if it is moving uphill, it has zero or close to zero erosional power. So to say the Colorado River formed the Grand Canyon slowly is just simply a lie. That is impossible. This geologic column was made up by a guy named Charles Lyell back in 1830. He wrote this book, Principles of Geology. He and other fellows, Steno and Strata Smith and these guys, invented this geologic column. It is pure fiction. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world except in the textbooks. There is no geologic column.